Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to another installment of Draven's Classic Modular Reviews, a series where I go over some of the classic adventures, modules, and campaigns that I have in my personal collection. In the last episode I looked at Prison of the Firebringer from Dungeon Issue number 101, an adventure that I talked about having run in a campaign of my own creation. Now that campaign was actually partially inspired by another Dungeon Magazine adventure, and one that I wanted to kind of touch on briefly. That adventure appeared in issue number 96, and the adventure itself was called Provincial Prior Cause. And what Provincial Prior Cause was, it's a short adventure. I think it's only about 5 pages long. Just a little over 5 pages long, and it was designed for first level characters. The basic premise of the adventure is that it's a prequel to a book called The Bloody Eye, which was printed in January 2003, and was part of the Dungeons & Dragons novel series that was kind of tied to the generic or the iconic D&D characters. I believe The Bloody Eye revolved heavily around the character of Jozan, which was the cleric of Pelor. So this was sort of a prequel to that. The book, The Bloody Eye, was credited to the author T.H. Lane, which was basically an in-house name, and the actual author was Johnny L. Wilson. That little bit of trivia aside, the basic setup for the adventure was kind of interesting because it involves an order of clerics, worshippers of Pelor, that refer to themselves as the Soldiers of the Sun. And they were an order that took a lot of inspiration from the real-world Knights Templar, in that they were a group of religious knights, and likewise they were also similarly disbanded by a king. Instead of being, King Philip IV, it was, a fictional king in the Dungeons & Dragons world. Knowing that this was coming up and that, they were going to be basically banned or outlawed, members of the Soldiers of the Sun split the treasury that they had collected basically in two, so it couldn't be seized, and two high-ranking individuals went basically in opposite directions, and were to more or less exchange information back and forth so that they knew what the other was up to. At this point, the player characters are hired by a Theobald of Agatine, and he was one of the high-ranking members. It was basically the player characters were sent to seek out the other high-ranking member who took his portion of the treasury, and that was an individual by the name of Augustine Calmet. The player characters arrive at the island in which Augustine was to be sent to, and they're going to basically try to search what's called the hermitage that he was staying in. When the characters arrive immediately on shore, they actually come across the dead body of a soldier of Pelor, wearing a tabard with the symbol of Pelor on the chest, mace of Pelor, and the soldier was dead and partially eaten. Before the player characters really have a chance to find out what's going on, this wild boar rushes and attacks them. When the player characters defeat the boar, they actually notice that the boar only has a singular eye. After that's dealt with, however, the player characters continue along their way, where they come across a group of horse thieves that have jumped a similar group of Pelor worshippers, killing 2 of the individuals that were there, as well as knocking unconscious their young squire, in an attempt to steal the horses. The player characters deal with the thieves, and they're able to revive the squire, a young lad by the name of Aidan Pym, who informs the player characters of what's going on. As it turns out, Augustus Calmet has been... he lost his faith in the Church of Pelor. Dissatisfied with the way that the Soldiers of the Sun were handled and the fact that they had become outlaws, even though they had done no wrong. Augustine Calmet gave up worship of Pelor and instead converted to the worship of the one-eyed god Grimish, god of the orcs. The player characters, on their way to investigate the hermitage where Augustine Calmet was staying, come across an encounter with a cleric of Grimish, a human cleric of Grimish, as well as his human barbarian bodyguard, and the cleric's falcon, which is also one-eyed, similar to the cleric himself. Defeating them, the player characters make their way to the hermitage, and ultimately they confront a bugbear cleric of Grumish named Edfang, who was trying to destroy a sacred relic to the Order of, or the Soldiers of the Sun, the Hammer of Saint Winfred, which is a +1 warhammer that radiates an aura of positive energy, and it deals like 1d6 points of divine damage on a successful hit. Prior to the player characters arriving on the scene, Augustine Calmet took his portion of the treasury, fled the area, left the cleric behind, basically to intercept any travelers or any adventurers that may come seeking him out, and he left Edfang behind with instructions to destroy this sacred warhammer, basically as sort of a message to the Order, or the Soldiers of the Sun. And that's the adventure. Once they defeat the bugbear cleric, the adventure is over, but the possibilities continue on. So the reason that I kind of like this adventure, like I said, it is a very short one. It's only, like I said, a few pages long and a few encounters. But the reason that I really liked it is it was an interesting take on the god of Grumish. A note that they find says that they, Augustine Calmet, I keep wanting to say Augustus, but Augustine Calmet wants to become the avatar of Grumish and believes he can do so by restoring what's referred to as the old gods. And then that can be done. The only thing that's also referenced is the rebuilding, and let me just see if I can find the precise name here. The rebuilding of Scon, I believe is the name of it, and it leaves Scon undefined. Whether it's a temple to the old gods, whether it's some sort of ancient relic, it doesn't really say specifically what it is. And I actually, like I said, I really like this adventure. It was the first adventure that I ever ran out of Dungeon Magazine from one of the first issues that I ever owned. And in fact, I think this was the second one that I ever ended up picking up, if I recall correctly. So again, it was really cool. I like the fact that, again, it put Grumish in a different light. So he's not just this savage, feral god of orcs. I mean, he is that, but there's a potential for him to be so much more. And I found that to be really intriguing. And over time, I ended up creating campaigns that, one that I tried to run, unfortunately wasn't very successful, just kind of because the group that I was running it for wasn't really into the story so much as, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but a lot of them were just in it for kind of the power gaming type of thing. One of the players wasn't really interested in role-playing anymore, but continued to show up just because it was a way to get together with everybody. So it didn't unfortunately go the way that I was hoping it did, but I did run a campaign where that was the opening chapter. And then the player character is going to be basically trying to pursue Augustine Calmet throughout the entirety of the campaign, and try to stop his plans to restore Grumish to his former glory, whatever that was going to be. That did sort of evolve into a different campaign that I ended up running, which again revolved around the Orc Pantheon instead of just Grumish himself. And that one actually ran for quite some time, and that's the campaign where I incorporated the Prison of the Firebringer adventure into, just to kind of fill the gap in levels that I had created. So that was basically the adventure. Again, it was a short one. It was kind of cool that it was tied to the line of Dungeons & Dragons novels that was coming out. Now these weren't the Forgotten Realm novels or Dragonlance or Eberron or anything like that. Eberron hadn't existed at this point yet. But this was sort of like their generic line of novels that revolved around their iconic characters. I don't own any of them, but I kind of want to see if I could pick up the Bloody Eye at this point, just to see if I can read more about the characters involved in that adventure that I ran so many years ago. So anyway, let me know in the comments below if there's any Dungeon Magazine adventures that you guys have ever run, or if a Dungeon Magazine adventure ever served as sort of the spark for creating an entire campaign around. Again, the campaigns that I ended up running based off this lasted for, the first one was only a couple of months before I kind of got tired of, like I said, unfortunately, the group that I was playing with. The second incarnation of it, where things had changed and didn't really bear a huge resemblance to the previous one, but the adventure that I did, or the campaign that I did, end up running successfully up until I didn't get to, unfortunately, conclude it. We got pretty near the end of the campaign before work schedules, lives, and other things just kind of got in the way of us being able to get together. But that one lasted, I think, about a year and a half. So that campaign went on for quite some time. And I do plan on doing a video in the near future where I kind of give you the premise or the backstory of that campaign, and I may even do a few kind of stories from the adventures that I ended up running. But anyway, that was just, like I said, one of my, it was the first adventure I ever run from Dungeon Magazine. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really cool adventure, and again, I liked the fact that it was so open-ended to future stories. Anyway, let me know what you guys thought, if you ran the adventure or anything similar like it. Again, you know, if any Dungeon Magazine adventures ever served as sort of a spark for a campaign of your design, let me know, because I'd really like to hear those stories. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.